Good morning, everyone. I'm Russ Cohen, and here we are along the glorious Riverwalk footpath along the Housatonic River in the scenic town of Great Barrington, Massachusetts in the Berkshires. And we're here this morning to look at the edible wild plants that are growing along Riverwalk. And this is a great place to see and learn about edible wild plants. It's not a great place to actually pick and harvest them, but it's a great place to learn about them. All right, here on the edge of the Riverwalk near the rain garden, we have a patch of sumac plants. Now this obviously isn't poison sumac, or I wouldn't be grabbing it like this. So how did I know it wasn't poison sumac? Well, there's a couple ways to tell. One way is just from the leaves itself. So this whole thing is a leaf. Here's a good example of it. So this is what is known as a compound leaf. This whole thing is one leaf, and these are called leaflets. You see how long and pointy and toothy these leaflets are. Poison sumac has much more egg-shaped leaflets, and they don't have teeth. So that's one way to tell just from that. This particular species of sumac is called Staghorn Sumac because the young growth on the plant, these developing young parts at the ends of the woodier twigs, they're furry like young deer antler velvet. So there's this one, the Staghorn Sumac. There's also the smooth sumac and the winged sumac. So those are three of the more common native sumacs that you're likely to encounter in Massachusetts. And all of those produce tight, upright clusters of red berries. It's another way to distinguish the edible sumacs from the poison sumac, because the poison sumac produces these loose, drooping clusters of white berries that look like poison ivy berries, because poison ivy and poison sumac are very closely related. So any sumac that's got these tight, upright clusters of red berries that are shaped like I'm holding my hand right now, that's not only not poison sumac, it's an edible sumac. So here behind me you see many stems of the sumac plants, and my guess is that these are all one single organism, that this is all a common root system that these individual shoots are sharing. And so although they look like separate plants, my guess is that they're just coming off a communal root system. So it's basically one giant clone that we're looking at here. The other thing that I'm guessing is that this is a male sumac plant, because ordinarily at the end of May when we're filming this, we would still be able to see the leftover berry clusters from last year's sumac plants on the plants. And the fact that we're not seeing any berry clusters here tells me that this is probably a male plant. But anyway, the edible part are the berries, and those are going to be out in midsummer onward. And so as I described before, you're going to look for these bright red clusters of berries on the plants about the same size and shape as my hand. And the plants, the sumac plants, will be covered with them in the summer. So what you need to do when you see the ripe sumac berry clusters is to test it and see if it's ripe. So what I will do is lick my finger and then rub it on the berry cluster and lick my finger again. And if I got a nice, strong, pleasing acid flavor, then I know the berries were ripe and ready to use. And if that berry cluster I tested was ripe, it's very likely that all the other berries on the plant will be the same degree of ripeness. So you just break those berry clusters off, bring them home, and this is all described in my book. I've got a chapter on sumac in my book, but basically you just put the ripe berry clusters in a bowl of water, and you knead them in the water like you're kneading bread dough for like 5 or so minutes, and you're getting the flavor off the berries into the water, and the water will turn this pink or pinkish orange color. And then fish the berries out. You're done with them. Take the liquid and put it through any kind of a filter like a paper towel. Let it drip through the paper towel, and that will hold back any remaining berries or hairs or anything else that's in the liquid. And then that will strain it. And then what goes through that filter, you can drink hot or cold, sweetened or unsweetened. And I typically drink it cold and sweetened like pink lemonade. In fact, I've heard a story, and I think this is plausible, that the whole reason there is something called pink lemonade is because people were drinking the sumac drink going back to the earliest times when they learned about it from the Native Americans that used sumac, and then they became accustomed to drinking the sumac drink, and lemons arrived later. And so for people to get comfortable drinking lemonade, they colored it pink so it more closely resembled the sumac-ade that people were already used to drinking. So, so this is a species that you often see on the edge of school ball fields or vacant lots and stuff like that, because it can tolerate conditions where the soil has been disturbed and the plant community has been disturbed. But that is its native habitat, its native niche that it seeks out. And so you don't have to go to a river to see it. Sumac can tolerate dry habitats and lots of other conditions. All right, let's see what else we can find. All right, here right along the Riverwalk pathway, we've got a couple examples of one of our edible birch trees. So this particular one, I call it black birch. Some people call it sweet birch or cherry birch. The botanical name is Betula lenta. And this one I tend to lump together with the yellow birch because they're usable the exact same way. So if you see a tree that looks like this, you want to look at the twigs, and by the way, the leaf on a birch tree, it reminds me of the leaf that's on the outside of the Breyer's ice cream box. So I look for that, and then as I find a twig, what I want to do is just scratch the outer bark off like that to expose the inner bark and give it a sniff. And if you found a black birch, you'll get the wintergreen smell. Which is oil of wintergreen, and it is in the inner bark of the black or yellow birch tree. And so that's the scratch and sniff test to know you've got the right thing. You can make a drink from these twigs, and you can do this any time of year. If you find black or yellow birches, you can just gather the twigs and get a knife or a carrot peeler and just peel the bark off the twigs, and then put the peeled twigs and the bark that you peeled off of them into a glass jar with water and just let it sit around for an hour. And that's how you get a wonderful wintergreen flavored drink without having to add anything. Now, there is a medicinal use for this oil of wintergreen too. The chemical name of oil of wintergreen is methyl salicylate, and it is related to salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin. And so the oil of wintergreen does have a pain-killing effect. So if you were hiking in the woods and you twisted your ankle, you could find a black or yellow birch twig to chew on. At the very least, it would distract you from the pain in your ankle. Now, one last thing about eating birch trees, and this is true not for just black or yellow birches, but for any species of birch, is you can tap a birch tree for sap. Now, obviously, a tree like this is going to be too small in diameter. You'd want to have a tree that's at least 8 inches or more in diameter, and there are certainly places in Massachusetts where the birches get that big. And so this is true for any species of birch, so gray birch, black or yellow, those are the 3 most common ones in Massachusetts, is you tap the trees just like you would a maple tree, and you can extract the sap and drink the sap just plain, or you can make stuff with the sap. And the sap starts flowing a couple weeks after the maples stop flowing. So in this part of the state, that would be like the beginning of April is when I think about tapping birch trees for sap. And we had some birch trees on my family's land in eastern Mass, and we tapped them for sap in the spring, and we were getting a gallon of sap per hour out of these taps. So the trees really gush. Unfortunately, the sap is even waterier than maple sap, so you have to boil the heck out of it to get anything. And what you eventually get looks and tastes just like molasses, but molasses is so cheap and so easy to get at the stores. My advice would be to just go buy molasses. You're not going to save any time or money having made your own molasses from birch sap. Having said that, if let's say you were camping during the time of the year when the birch sap was flowing and you were concerned about the potability of the water supplies at the place where you were camping, is you could tap the birch trees then and get all the pure, clean drinking water you needed that way. All right, so here on this chokecherry plant, we're seeing the very beginning of the cherries as the plant has bloomed and now the little cherries are forming on the plant. So these will be ripe in August, and they'll have a maroon color to them when they're ripe and not shiny. Were this to be black cherry raceme, on the ripe fruit it would be quite dark purpley black in color and shiny. And chokecherries are called chokecherries just because if you eat them raw they make your mouth pucker. But chokecherries are used to make chokecherry jam and jelly. And black cherries can be quite good for eating just plain straight off the plant. But this one tends to be better jam or jelly, or Native Americans would dry the fruit and then use it as an ingredient in pemmican, the Native American equivalent of power bars. And it's very typical to see the chokecherry as a shrubby tree, as we are here along Riverwalk. And black cherries get to be much, much taller, like 50 or 60 feet tall. But this tends to be more diminutive cousin. So just a few feet from those chokecherries is a hawthorn plant. And this one's still blooming, as we can see. And it has white flowers with 5 petals, which is characteristic of many species also in the rose family. And hawthorns, another way to identify the plant when the flowers aren't on the plant is to look for the thorns. Okay, and if you see right here, the end of the plant has a thorn to it right there where my finger is. And this is actually rather small for hawthorn. Sometimes hawthorn thorns can be 2 or more inches long and quite intimidating. So the main edible part on a hawthorn are the ripe fruits, and those will be out toward the end of the summer, and they'll be red and look like little miniature apples. And they taste like little miniature apples. And the flavor of hawthorn fruits varies quite a lot from shrub to shrub. So my advice is to taste one and see what you think. And if you like it, then you can gather some of those fruit and eat it. And if you don't give up on hawthorns, just keep trying them. You might find one that you like better. So besides tasting good, hawthorns have a very good reputation medicinally as being good for the heart. And you can get your medicine just by eating the hawthorns and making tea from the ripe hawthorn fruits. Here at Riverwalk, it's been great for me because of the particular interest in native plants, and so I have been leading walks here for many years talking about the edibility of plants. Many of these species are very appropriate for people to establish in their own yards, and perhaps they'll get the idea from seeing the plants at Riverwalk that, gee, this plant is nice. It would be nice to have this in my own yard, and then they can establish their own growth there. And of course, once the plant's growing in your own yard, you can nibble on it all you want. So I hope you've enjoyed this little excursion we've had along Riverwalk with me this morning and learned a few things about these edible plants that we've encountered along the way. And I hope that we'll be able to get together in person sometime and do some more wild edibles here along Riverwalk in Great Barrington, or some other spot along some other river in the future. So thank you very much.